The crisp order of a state visit to Japan. For the increasingly embattled Turkish Prime Minister, this is a world away from the murky political chaos at home. Mr. Erdogan claims to be the victim of a conspiracy and points the finger at his one-time supporters in his own party. In particular, this man, the Islamic cleric Fethullah Gulen. Mr. Gulen is now in exile in the US. He leads a movement which has millions of followers around the world and huge financial clout. It purports to be not extremist, but pro-democracy, and it has condemned terrorism. The movement has huge influence in the Turkish government bureaucracy, particularly the police and judiciary. Prosecutors sympathetic to Mr. Gulen are accused of being behind the arrest of senior government figures on corruption charges. The Minister for the Economy, the Interior Minister and the Environment Minister all had to resign. Their sons were charged with being involved in high-level fraud and bribes for construction projects. Now the Prime Minister appears to have launched a full-scale attack on the criminal justice system. Hundreds of police officers and investigators have been removed and assigned new positions, many to traffic jobs or local duties. There are deep worries over where all this leaves the rule of law, but Mr. Erdogan claims the corruption scandals are a foreign-led plot, and he refuses to bow to calls for his resignation. He may even run for president later this year. Many are watching nervously to see how this bitter internal power struggle will play out. Emily Buchanan, BBC News.
So with question marks over financial probity and the enforcement of anti-corruption rules, where does this leave the all-important business climate in Turkey? Let's get the views of Cüneyt Kazokoğlu, who joins us here in the studio. Welcome. What do you make of what it is that you're seeing in Turkey? If one could see an end game in a particular direction in which you were heading, it would be easier, really, and not make business feel quite so nervous, wouldn't it?
Definitely. I mean, the point is that obviously for a sound business climate we need some factors like stability, some sort of a transparency, and which adds basically to the transparency. In my humble view, basically with all these events going on in Turkey and the way the government deals with these events, all these factors are deteriorating relatively quickly. Stability has been one of the main assets of the AKP government over the last 10 years, but with the increasing public and political social unrest becoming more and more likely with the upcoming 2 elections in 2014, this is now worsening, weakening basically. Transparency is weakening as well, obviously, because the government basically has no whatsoever accountability. I read, in fact, actually, I read today in the Times newspaper a term, Putinification, which says it all really. And with all these factors, the forecastability deteriorates as well, and markets simply don't like lack of forecastability when it comes to countries like Turkey. Why? Because Turkey has a large external financing requirement, is a persistent current account deficit, which has now widened to above 7% compared to last year's 6%. And over the next 12 months, so over the next year, Turkey has around $230 billion of external financing requirements. And half of this, just to finish it, half of this will be in form of short-term, relatively volatile portfolio investments. And with the lack of stability, lack of transparency, lack of forecastability, to gather this money, this amount of short-term investments will even more and more difficult.
It remains the case, though, that Turkey is a country which has a lot of appeal to investors.
It remains the case. I mean, over the AKP government obviously managed to change something so good as well. I mean, the banking system is relatively robust compared to other developing countries. Public debt is decreasing, government budget is solid, but these may or may not be enough to take the country's economy to the next level, so to say.
Would you say much depends on the survival or not of Erdogan?
It's not so the survival, but in terms of a country like Turkey, which relies on external financing, it really depends on stability and forecastability. And outside factors are deteriorating as well. I mean, Fed has started tapering, cutting the quantitative easing, so it will become more and more difficult to find external financing. And with this situation and this worsening in the image of Turkey as an investment opportunity, the result will be simply I hope not, but it looks like it. It will be the devaluation of Turkish lira, higher inflation, and a slower economic expansion. I mean, the Turkish lira has lost 20% since mid-May, and since the start of the corruption probe, it has lost 7 to 8%. Inflation is around 7.5%, far off the central bank's target of like 5%. Yeah. So it doesn't, all in all, to sum it up, 2014 will be a much more difficult year for Turkey than 2013.
Thank you very much.